Hey, City Church, as you can tell this summer, we will investigate Jesus by studying Luke's account of Jesus' amazing life. And I do use the word investigate intentionally because our faith can be investigated. And so this summer, we're gonna study through Luke together, and I also want to invite you to join with us in reading Luke's account of Jesus' life for yourself. And so on your way out, we have a reading plan for you. We're gonna read 3 chapters a week, but we set it up to where you can break it up however you want. If you wanna read all 3 at the same time, go for it. And then on the back of the card, we're inviting you to follow along with us, to stay with us this summer on various social media platforms where some of our pastors and leaders will be sharing some devotional thoughts on Luke so we can all apply Luke together as we read it. Now, I want to begin our study by asking you a couple of questions. First question, do you know what you believe about Jesus? I mean, there's one thing to sort of know some stuff about Jesus, but do you really know what you believe about Jesus? And do you know why you believe what you believe about Jesus? That's going to be the purpose of this study. And these questions are so significant because in our culture, many people, let's just be honest, are walking away from Christianity. In certain places in our world, Christianity is spreading like wildfire, but in other places, people are walking away from it. Europe has been post-Christian for years. Canada is right behind them, and the United States is quickly becoming post-Christian, especially among the younger generations. And I think that many people are walking away from Christianity because they don't know why they believe what they believe about Jesus. In this series, I want to do something about that. Now, Frank Turek is an ex-Navy pilot who became a professor at George Washington University, and he is a defender of the Christian faith. He co-wrote a book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Intriguing title, right? And so he lectures and debates on college campuses and in other public venues, and he debates with these so-called new atheist scholars, and he's a defender of the Christian faith. And he made an interesting observation. I'm gonna share it with you. He says that the reason so many people are easily talked out of Christianity is because they were never talked into it in the first place. In other words, the reason so many people, especially college students, young adults, and even older adults, so many people are walking away from Christianity because they don't know why they believe what they believe about Jesus. And so when their faith gets tested, they don't know why they walk away. They believed what somebody else believed, but they never investigated Jesus for themselves, so that became their faith. And so this summer, I want to help everybody to wrestle with their belief, what you believe about Jesus, and why you believe what you believe about Jesus. And so if you would say, Pastor Brent, I'm not a believer yet. I'm just checking things out. First of all, I want you to know you're welcome here. And what I hope will happen through this series is to give you some compelling, logical, reasonable reasons to believe in Jesus so you will follow him too. And if you could be honest, if you're one of the people who has walked away from Christianity, but now you're open to exploring Christianity again, I hope through this series to give you some compelling reasons to believe. And if you would say, Pastor Brent, I am a believer. I'm a follower of Jesus. Then my hope through this series is that we will all together get clear about why we believe what we believe about Jesus so that we can share our faith with others more effectively. Now, I want to begin our study by making something very clear. God never asks anyone to take anything by faith alone. Does that statement shock you? God never asks anyone to take anything by faith without a reason to believe. The Christian faith is not just some kind of vague hope based on religious traditions that get passed on and on and on, that you just gotta believe. Have you ever had somebody tell you that? Oh, you've just gotta believe. Especially when you're asking the question, why? Why would I believe this stuff? And if you're in the South, it was probably something more like, well, you just gotta believe, brother. Or you just gotta believe, sister. Has anyone ever said that to you? I hate that. I know I don't like it, and I promise you I'm not gonna ask you just to believe, brother or sister. I'm gonna give you reasons to believe. And so God never asks anyone to take anything by faith without a reason. Faith is always in something or someone, and the historic Christian faith that we will be investigating during this series is based on credible historical evidence. And we're going to look at it together. What we believe is based upon documented eyewitness accounts of Jesus' amazing life, his miracles, his teachings, his death, and ultimately his resurrection. We believe based upon those who witnessed his life and then historically documented it. Now, this part of the Christian faith is very important to me personally. I've been honest with you guys over the years that I went through a season in my life where I questioned why I believed what I believed about Jesus. I grew up in the church. My parents raised me to be a Christian, but I got to that age, if I could just be honest, where I was like, okay, am I just a Christian because my parents raised me in the church and I live in America? And that's, at least at that time, it sort of just went along with it. And so I began to question my faith. And I began to look for reasons to believe, but I also opened myself up that I might not end up believing in Jesus. I read books and I heard lectures from people who don't believe in God and heard why they don't believe in God. I've heard stuff about why people don't believe in Jesus. I even spent time studying other religions and other religious movements. And as I went through this season in my life, I think it was important for me. I was asking the question, why should I believe this stuff? And I did become convinced of this. The Christian faith rises or falls on the identity of Jesus of Nazareth. And so that means that the key question I think that we need to wrestle with is this. Are Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John historically reliable accounts of actual events? And I think all four of them are, but I would just say if just one of them is, if one of these documents is historically reliable and it recounts actual events, then we ought to pay attention to it. You know what I'm saying? We ought to consider believing in the one that they write about and following him too. And so this summer, we will investigate Luke's account of Jesus' life and seek to determine if we believe it is a historically reliable account of actual events. Now, let me just start by saying this particular message is the most unusual message I've ever delivered in my entire life. And I say that because the passage we're gonna look at today, I've never spoke on ever. I'm 60 years old, I've never spoke on it, but I'm speaking on it today. And so I'm asking you to hang with me today, all right? And I think there are times, folks, there are times where as a leader in Jesus' movement, where you need me to get into a message like this where I defend our faith. It's especially important because in our culture where people have become apathetic about our faith and at times, let's acknowledge, antagonistic toward us, and some of that's by our own doing. I think we have to be honest about that. And I am especially concerned, and a part of our church is focused on mobilizing the next generation as leaders in Jesus' movement. Well, we're gonna have to help them understand why we believe what we believe about Jesus. And so that we're gonna study through Luke, and we're gonna look at everything he shows us, but we're also going to look at it from the perspective of, do we think this is a historically reliable account of Jesus in actual events? Okay, let's start with the author of this gospel account. His name is Luke. He was a physician by trade in the first century. He was not Jewish. He became a follower of Jesus based on the eyewitness accounts of others who shared their stories with him. He became a believer. He traveled with the Apostle Paul, who wrote half of the Christian scriptures. He ended up going to Jerusalem with him at least once, I suspect more times. So he got to know the inner circle of Jesus' disciples like Peter, like John, and we do know that he rubbed shoulders with Jesus' half-brother James, who became a leader in Jesus' movement after he witnessed his own brother's resurrection. And I suspect that he also got a chance to either talk to Mary, we don't know, or he got the stories of Jesus' birth, because Luke is one of the 4 accounts that tells the story of Jesus' miraculous birth. And so Luke begins his account of Jesus' life by seeking to hook his readers. He's got a purpose behind this gospel account, and he tells everybody up front why he's writing this account of Jesus' life. So let's start with Luke chapter 1, verse 1. He writes, "Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us." And so I want us to notice, he says that many have undertaken to give an account of Jesus' life. Now, how many is many? Like when I say many, how many do you think? Is 4 many? I don't think 4 sounds like many. Does it sound like to you? I think, 30 sounds like many, 40, maybe 50 sounds like many, but 4 doesn't sound like many. And some of you know where I'm going with this, and how come we only have 4 accounts of Jesus' life? If Luke says that when he's writing his, there were many. Because the Roman Emperor Diocletian in the late 3rd century openly persecuted Christians, and one of the things he did was he gathered their many documents and burned them. The only ones that survived are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that we know of to this day. But here's my point. When Luke is writing his account of Jesus' life, there were many out there already. And this is so significant. Okay, let me ask you a question. Do you think anybody's going to undertake to draw up an account of your life? Do you think many will? Probably no one. Me too. I'm a nobody, okay? But something happened in the 1st century that compelled many to document Jesus' life. And you have to understand how unusual this was. There were very few people who wrote history in the 1st century about the region where Jesus was, Judea and Galilee. Only one that we know of, his name was Josephus, and he only wrote about famous people, and the famous people he wrote about, they got just a paragraph. He didn't write about very many people, or not a lot about very many people, and he was only one person. But Luke says that many had already written down and documented Jesus' life. And I think that's significant because you know what that tells us? Why? Why would so many people document Jesus' life, tell his story? I think Jesus, think about who he was. He was a day laborer. He was a nobody who became a traveling rabbi for 3 years only, and then he was rejected by his own people and executed by the Roman government. Why was his story worth telling? And I think the answer is obvious. Because something extraordinary happened 2,000 years ago when this man began his movement. And it was so extraordinary, and he was so extraordinary, that multitudes of people felt compelled to document his life, his teachings, his miracles, and his resurrection, and his promises to you and to me. And so Luke tells us that he's going to add to the many who had already documented Jesus' life. And I want you to notice who the many are written to. He says he's going to write about the things that have been fulfilled among us, not among them. You see where I'm going? Among us. That means he's writing for people who also talked with Jesus, walked with Jesus, witnessed Jesus. They witnessed the miracles, they witnessed the resurrection. It's about us. It's the things that have happened to us. Notice what Luke writes next. Luke chapter 1, verse 2. Just as those many accounts, were handed down to us by those who were from the first, were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. And this is the word I want to focus on. Here's what Luke is telling us. All of the accounts I'm going to give you, I got these from eyewitnesses. People who saw what happened. People who heard Jesus, who witnessed his miracles, who witnessed his death and his resurrection. And the reason Luke wants us to know he got his information from eyewitnesses is because most of us feel eyewitness testimony is the most compelling. And here's where Luke is going with this, and this is important for us. He's going to ask his readers to make a decision based on the eyewitness testimony of people who did see Jesus. And that's what I'm going to ask of you. I am going to ask you to make a decision about what you believe about Jesus based on eyewitness accounts of Jesus' amazing, extraordinary life. Now, we make decisions based on credible evidence all the time, don't we? I mean, our whole judicial system is based on our belief that you can hear credible evidence and make decisions even though you didn't personally see what happened. Have you ever been on a jury? So back when I was a student at UTSA, I got on a jury trial. I was trying to get out of it. You know what you do. You say all the things to get out of it. I mean, I was a full-time student, but I was on it. Okay. And it was a attempted murder trial. And so what the prosecutors presented was that a man robbed a couple who in their garage, they melted down gold coins and made jewelry out of it. They accused the man of taking a ball-peen hammer and attacking this couple, leaving them for dead and taking the gold coins and the jewelry. And so the police found the gold coins taken from the site on the man in his property. They found the jewelry on his person. They also found the hammer with the couple's blood on it. And so they presented all of that evidence, which was pretty strong. But then the wife ended up surviving. And she came and became an eyewitness to what happened. And at the end of it all, the judge asked us as jurors to make a decision. And we all found the evidence pretty overwhelming, but the most compelling of all was the eyewitness testimony of the woman who looked at him and said, "That's the man who killed my husband and attacked me." And so we made a decision. And that is what I'm going to ask you to do. We made a decision about what we believe happened, even though none of us saw it happen. And that's what I'm asking you to do. None of you saw what Jesus did. I mean, it's pretty obvious. But I am going to ask you to make a decision based on the evidence of eyewitness testimony about what he did and what he said. And my hope is that you will find it compelling enough to believe in Jesus and to follow him in your life. Now, next, Luke wants us to know how he went about writing his account. Okay, so this is Luke chapter 1, first part of verse 3. With this in mind, that I'm gonna write this account, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning. And here's the part I want us to focus on. He says, I carefully investigated all of this. That means he did research. He went to all of the people he could find who were eyewitnesses, who could give firsthand accounts of what they heard Jesus teach, what they saw him do. And that's why Luke includes the accounts of so many parts of Jesus' story that you don't see in the other gospel accounts. I think it's very significant. And that he says he carefully investigated all the way back to the beginning. And you'll see when you start reading Luke, he gives the miraculous story behind John the Baptist's birth and Jesus' birth. One of only two gospels that tells us anything about Jesus' childhood and background and amazing birth. And so he carefully investigated everything. And so I want to ask you a question. Does this sound like Luke is writing a myth? Does it sound like Luke is writing what he believes is a lie? Let me tell you why I say that. Because there are scholars out there who call themselves the new atheists who assert that the accounts about Jesus' life are myth and lies made to prop up a religion. And if Luke's account began with something like, once in a long time ago in a land far, far away, which is how you set up a sort of a story, okay, got it. But it's very evident, if you look at what he says, that Luke is documenting. He's going and doing the research. He is going to give us evidence from eyewitnesses. And can I just say, I don't think Luke believes he's writing a myth or a lie. As you read Luke, which I'm asking you to do, you're going to see he believes what he's writing. And that's why he's writing it. And can I just say that, follow along with me, if Luke believes Jesus is the Son of God, which is you're going to see he does, wouldn't he take great care to make sure he got his story right? I think he would. I think I would. And I think he did. He continues. This is the rest of verse 3. So with this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, all the way back to the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus. And we think this is likely a rich, non-Jewish person that sort of fronted the money for this project, okay? This is what I want us to focus on though. He says, I'm writing an orderly account. Luke is not spinning a story, he's writing history. He makes his writing orderly, and you're gonna notice this as you read through Luke, by setting his account of Jesus' life in a certain time period, and he dates it. And the way he dates it, historians in that day didn't date things the way we do in Numbers. They did it based on who was ruling where, when. And so you're gonna see all through Luke, he's gonna tell you who was ruling where, and that lets you know this is the historic time when this account that I'm giving you, this is when it occurred. And here's why, I think that this distinction, this orderly account is so important for us today. Track with me. Luke is not sitting down to write the Bible. He's not thinking that his account of Jesus' life is like, and 300 years later, I think he wrote about 50 to 60 AD, about 20 to 30 years after Jesus' death and resurrection, somewhere around then. He doesn't think I'm writing the Bible. He's just writing history. He's writing the history and including Jesus' teaching so people who wanted to follow Jesus would know who he was, what he did, what he taught, and why we ought to follow him. That's all he's thinking about, is giving this historic account of Jesus' life. And so the question for us to consider is this, and especially those of you exploring our faith, or maybe if you could be honest, I was about in my upper teens, my lower 20s when I was wrestling with my faith. Do you think Luke is lying or is mistaken? And I think as you read through Luke's account of Jesus' life, you're going to see, and this is what I said a moment ago, Luke believes his account about Jesus and his life. Luke believed based on the credible eyewitness testimonies of actual people who heard and followed Jesus. And if what Luke writes is a carefully investigated, orderly account, I think we ought to pay attention to it. It then becomes, in my opinion, the most amazing and significant piece of history, the historical document in human history. And Luke ends the last part of the beginning of his account telling what the purpose for this historic document is, and this is Luke 1:4. He says, so that I'm gonna write this account that I'm carefully investigating, I'm gonna put it all in order, chronological order, so you may know with certainty the things that you've been taught. He wants, okay, so he's writing it. So he's writing it first to the people in the first century, many of whom could go and talk to these eyewitnesses themselves. And he's writing so that they would believe in Jesus and follow Jesus. He's calling for them to make a decision so that they would know with certainty what they believed about Jesus and why they believe what they believe about Jesus. And Luke didn't just write for them. He knew that this would be copied, because that's what they did in the first century. They took all of those many accounts and they meticulously copied them and they spread them throughout the whole Roman Empire. It's amazing. And my hope and my prayer for you is that as we study through Luke, as we read through Luke together, that you would gain certainty about what you believe about Jesus, so that you will follow him too. Now, during that season where I wrestled with my faith, I said, I opened myself. It was sort of scary for me, because I was really, how you're in your brain, you talk to yourself. I was like really open to not being a Christian anymore. You have to sort of get there to not be there, at least for me. And I got there, and I read other religious works, and I explored other philosophies and other perspectives that I had never explored before. And I came out of that season very convinced in the historical reliability of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And because of that, it actually caused me to believe in Jesus with greater certainty, which was important for me. And it made me more, committed to follow Jesus, more committed, you know what I mean? With greater commitment to follow Jesus. That's where I ended up. Now, through this series, I'm inviting you to investigate the reason you ought to follow Jesus too. Now, you may end up deciding you don't want to follow Jesus because it's inconvenient. You know what I'm saying? You start following Jesus, and he's gonna ask some stuff from you. So let me give you an example. You follow Jesus, he's gonna ask you to forgive people you don't feel like forgiving and who don't deserve it. And that's inconvenient. You follow Jesus, and he's gonna ask you to become less selfish and instead to sacrificially serve others. And that's inconvenient. You follow Jesus, he's gonna call you to love your enemies and to pray for people who have hurt you. And that's not only inconvenient, that's hard. You follow Jesus, and he is going to call you to give your time, and yes, even your money, to support his movement, and that's inconvenient. And you follow Jesus, he's going to call you to live God's purpose for your life, even when it costs you, especially when it costs you. And that's inconvenient and hard. But if you will follow Jesus, he promises you can experience an abundant life. What if forgiveness is what sets us free from the anger and the bitterness that spoils our soul? What if becoming selfless is what sets us free from the pride that damages our relationships? What if loving even your enemies is what allows you to rise above your most painful life experiences? What if giving your time and your money to his movement is what moves you and your resources into God's flow of blessing? And what if pursuing God's purpose for your life is what brings significance and meaning to your life? So if you decide to not follow Jesus or to stop following Jesus because it's inconvenient, that's at least logical. I get it, because there are times it will be inconvenient, but please, please, please don't not follow Jesus or stop following Jesus because you've not seriously investigated Luke's account of Jesus' life with an open mind and an open heart. Because if you do, and that's what I'm inviting you to do this summer, and if you're gone, I know people traveling this summer, watch us online. and go through the reading plan. If you'll follow with us and investigate Jesus, my hope and my prayer is that you will be convinced too. Because I became convinced that 2,000 years ago, something extraordinary happened through an extraordinary man. And that everybody in his day knew it wasn't just for them. They knew it was for all people over the whole world of every generation. And so they felt compelled, many of them felt compelled to write the account of his life so that you and I could have a chance to believe in Jesus and follow him too. It's for you, it's for me, it's for us, it's for our city, for our country, and our world. And I'm inviting you to investigate Jesus. And my prayer is that you will believe in him and follow him too. So, Father God, this has been an unusual message for me. And my prayer is that just some seeds of hope and faith and interest have been planted in us. And then my prayer for each one of us, for those who are exploring faith, considering faith, I pray that you would help them as they read Luke's account, as we study it together, with an open mind and an open heart. I pray that you would help us to see the beauty, the grace, and the love of your Son, whom you sent to live among us. And my prayer for those of us who already believe, who already follow Jesus, is that you would cause us to be more certain about what we believe and more committed to follow Jesus in our own lives. And so, Lord, I lift this all up to you, the one I believe is the Son of God, and my prayer is for blessings on those who read Luke's account and investigate you in their lives. Help us all to make a wise decision in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen.